Welcome into another episode of the Junkyard Dawgcast. It is a still Wolk UGA recruiting show edition, live after some big news that has happened throughout the week. I'm your host, Benjamin Wolk, as always, here with Jordan D. Hill. It's a bad week to be a Georgia hater. That's what I wanted to name the episode. Jordan said that we were too professional of an organization to portray it that way, and I usually leave those editorial decisions to Jordan because he's more equipped to make them than I am. But that is the case. We've been alluding to this week for a long, long time. We've said throughout the month of June that this would be a big week for Georgia recruiting, and that has certainly played out that way, and it's going to keep playing out that way over the next couple of days as well. We've got a bunch of commitments to talk about, both from Jordan's predicted commit team, from my predicted commit team. We do have a decommitment that we will contextualize for you as well, and we're going to look ahead to a couple more decisions that are going to happen throughout the course of this week, going into next week, probably some that happen in between that we aren't even 100% sure when they're going to be happening yet. And so we'll have all of that. We will have around the country arrow pointing up. We'll talk about predict to commit. We're not sure if we're going to do another predict to commit yet, just because of where we are in the timing of the year. But it is a loaded show, a ton to cover on the news front. Jordan, we're going to talk about some of the things that have happened. You've had 2 predict to commit wins over the last week. I've had 2 predict to commit wins over the last week. Let's talk about each of them. Who do you want to start with yours? Do you want to start with mine? Where should we go?
I'll be polite and let you go first, Ben. I will say this. What is hotter, the outside temperature or Georgia football recruiting right now?
Oh, gosh. I'm about to be in South Florida for the week, so I don't know if I haven't stepped outside much today. These next couple of days are going to be brutal for me between Fort Lauderdale and Bradenton, Florida. I don't even know if I want to be thinking about the number of different shirts that I'm going to have to replace during the course of the next week. We'll start with my team, Jordan. I think we talked about the 2 additions from my predicted commit team. That was Colquitt, Georgia running back Jay Lamar. That one happened today as we were doing this live. And then last night, Valdosta defensive lineman Cory Howard. I sort of think of them, well, in some ways I think of them similarly. These are 2 South Georgia football wins. I think anybody who follows Georgia recruiting the way that we do, the way that most of the people listening to this show do, know you treat South Georgia ads a little bit differently. There's something special about the water down there in South Georgia, whether that's at Colquitt County, which is known to have been a hotbed for top prospects in the past. Valdosta has put some players at Georgia just in recent recruiting cycles, but is always a perennial power in South Georgia. So in that respect, a lot of similarities. In terms of how their recruitments have played out over the last year or so, drastically different. And I think that part of that is just where they've fallen on Georgia's board and when Georgia has become aware of them. And so I'll start with Jay Lamar because it is the most immediate, it is the most pressing, and quite frankly, one of the more important make sure that Georgia gets them in this recruiting class, and that is the running back from Colquitt County. 6 foot, 205 pounds, only has played 1 season of varsity high school football. This is a guy that played football dominantly during his youth, got out of the game for a couple of years, got back into it for his junior season. Georgia's had a relationship with this guy predating him getting back into varsity football. Josh Crawford recruited his older brother when Josh Crawford was at Western Kentucky. So he is known about Jay Lamar and everything about his family and his upbringing, things that he's gone through in his life. He's known about that for years and years. And I think that helped establish Georgia in this recruitment much earlier than everyone else. And Josh Crawford, knowing what Jay Lamar was capable of being, said to him last summer, hey, I want to recruit you. I know what's possible for you. I need to see a couple of games of your junior film. And once I get, the proof out there to be able to show other Georgia coaches, this is what this guy can be as a running back, your profile is going to blow up and Georgia is going to be a legitimate player for you in your recruitment. I think it was 3, maybe 4 weeks into Jay Lamar's junior season, Georgia extended an offer. After that, just about everybody else that became involved in his recruitment, Clemson, Miami, Florida State, Auburn, Georgia Tech, all of them, all extended offers as well. This is one of those recruitments where if you read into every single waking moment and twist and turn of this recruitment, it might have felt like this one was rocky at times. It might have felt like Clemson had generated some buzz after he met with Dabo Swinney in the spring. It felt like Miami had gotten him on a spring practice, and after an official visit, they felt that they were in a position to potentially steal this guy away from the state of Georgia. But ultimately, this was one of those recruitments where way back in January of this year, I think Georgia felt really good about where it was in this recruitment. And I think coming out of his last official visit in June to Georgia, Georgia felt really good about where it stood for Jay Lamar. I don't think there was really that much drama in this recruitment, and I don't think that it was one that Georgia was going to ever lose in any way, shape, or form. And I think that that played itself out today. Big, important recruiting win for Josh Crawford. I know people have raised questions about, some of his ads or lack thereof at running back since he's come on board. I want to remind people he did play a critical role in landing Ousmane Kroma last cycle. And I think that it was factors far outside of Josh Crawford's control that resulted in Ousmane Kroma flipping to Florida State on signing day. I think that as far as Josh Crawford's involvement in that recruitment was concerned, he did everything that you could ask and more of a position coach to be able to win that recruiting battle, which he did. I think that in this case, this is one that Josh Crawford knew he couldn't lose, and I don't think that there was ever any scenario that he was going to lose. I think this was maybe my third predict to commit of the cycle. It was an early one. It was a pretty confident one. Jordan, I don't think that there's really that much more to add to this one other than Georgia really got its in-state guy at running back.
Yeah, I think that this was a recruitment, like you pointed out. It seemed like at a certain point, Clemson was working really hard to make this thing interesting, but Georgia wins out, and I think there's a number of reasons if you're a Georgia fan to be excited about Jay Lamar. One, if you're watching this on YouTube, we were playing his highlights, it's hard not to come away impressed. He's got really impressive speed. If he gets to the outside, you're in trouble. And some of the plays in that highlight reel, man, he hits the hole in the middle, and he's just gone. Very impressive. But also, too, I think we talked about this probably a few episodes ago at this point, where, if let's say Georgia does not get Jay Lamar, I think that there are huge questions about where they're going at running back in the 2026 cycle. We've talked about them swinging for the fences with guys like Savion Hyder, Derek Cooper, but Jay Lamar always felt like that guy that there was the most confidence in. And I know some of those other guys are rated higher or whatnot. I really like what I've watched of Jay Lamar, and Colquitt County is one of those programs in the state of Georgia you can just count on to turn out talent. And, it wasn't that long ago that Georgia got Dejon Edwards. And I thought he was a very underrated back for Georgia, very productive in his time. So, I think Georgia fans should be excited about this pickup. Had some big-time teams trying to land Jay Lamar over Georgia. And credit to Josh Crawford and credit to the staff. They did what had to be done to get the job done.
And Shane Daniel in the YouTube comment section asks what I think is a pressing question and an important question. Does Georgia land another top 10 running back in this cycle? And I like the way that you phrased that, another top 10 back, because technically speaking in the 24/7 sports recruiting rankings, Jay Lamar ranks as the number 11 running back. I think of Jay Lamar as a top 5-6 back in this cycle because that's how Georgia recruited him. There's a reason why there were some good backs, Jonas Walton, Carson Baker, Amari Latimer, Jerrion Campbell, some really good backs in Georgia, probably some others that I'm not even naming that will emerge as potential targets in the fall when Georgia's going through a reevaluation period. But there's a reason Jay Lamar was the one Peach State running back that Georgia brought in on official visits. They took a swing at Savion Hyder. They're still taking a swing at Derek Cooper. They're still taking a swing at Xavier Crowell. I think those were the three top out-of-state running backs that Georgia felt was within reach that they wanted to bring in on officials. But I think Jay Lamar being that fourth running back sometimes gets talked about as being like he was the fourth running back among that group. I don't think he was recruited that way. I think that Georgia considered Jay Lamar a must-sign in this class, and I think it's going to be approached that way going forward. We'll see with the other running backs, but I am confident that Georgia will try to sign a second running back in the 2026 class. Where Cory Howard, I think, is much different than Jay Lamar is just the trajectory of his recruitment and when Georgia got involved. This wasn't a situation where Georgia was far ahead of the game. They've been aware of Cory Howard. They've been taking a look at him. But I think this was a case where Georgia, we've seen it time and time again. Georgia gets out in the spring evaluation period, and someone in the state of Georgia just really catches their eye. I think it happened with Justin Green on the defensive line a couple cycles ago, even though he was a little, he was more highly rated, more known. I think that this was a guy that when Georgia gets out on the recruiting trail, they see guys in action, they start to realize this is what you can mold and this is what they can become. And, Cory was someone that Georgia wanted to come up on a spring or a camp visit at the beginning of June. He wasn't able to make that. I think that probably delayed the inevitable in this one. Like, I think that Cory Howard probably would have been committing to Georgia prior to this week if he had taken that visit to Georgia and camped earlier in the summer, because there were other higher rated prospects in the state of Georgia that had official visits scheduled to Georgia that were maybe even on some of our predict-to-commit teams that didn't end up performing as well as Cory Howard did when he got on campus for a private workout. And I think that's so important to watch this time of year. Georgia really trusts getting their hands on people. They trust their evaluation of guys in private workouts on the defensive line as much or more than any other position. It's valuable to them everywhere, especially on the defensive line. And I think that Cory Howard really, really impressed doing that private workout, I might add, after he took the official visit. Very rarely do guys go on official visits, still have to come kind of prove it on a private workout and don't miss a beat. They don't say, oh, my ego's too big to be doing this. I shouldn't have to be doing this. Cory Howard wanted that spot at Georgia. He went, he earned it. And, when I talk with Shelton Felton, who is the head coach at Valdosta, he's been the head coach at, Crisp County. I remember back in the day when he was the coach of Big Cat Bryant and Quay Walker. And so he has seen guys that these top programs think that they can mold into being top players. And he was straightforward with me about it. He said, this is not someone who is, ready-made to be a top SEC, all SEC guy right when he steps on campus. This is a guy, when you look at the dimensions, the measurables, the frame, the build that Georgia can add to, they can make him really anything that they want to be. And I think that when you're talking about ceiling and potential, that's what you're talking about with Cory Howard. This is the guy that I think when Scott Sinclair gets his hands on him, when Trey Scott gets his hands on him, he can become so much more than the player he is today. And I think that in this day and age of college football recruiting, you've got to swing for the fences for your defensive linemen that you think are elite future first round type of guys. You also have to really trust your evals and go get some guys and say, this is a canvas that I can work with to turn into something that is a prototypical NFL defensive lineman that Georgia has at that 4-eye position. And I think that's what Cory Howard can be. Big recruiting win over Florida, but I do think that this was just a situation where once Georgia, confirmed that they really, really wanted Cory Howard, that this is just the way that it was going to go.
I have to imagine that meant a lot to Cory Howard coming out of that workout and earning that spot and showing the coaches that he's got what it takes. And you hit on some of the biggest things to me. This is a guy that he's not going to be maybe in the mix as a true freshman, but you see the tools are there and there is the ability to get him in. You pointed out, very good story over on Dogs 24/7, talking with Shelton Felton, and Shelton saying that Cory's put on like 26 pounds this offseason. So really interested to see how he plays and how he moves as a senior there at Valdosta. And yeah, really liked watching his junior highlights. And again, keeping in mind that he's put on some good weight getting ready for his senior year. But, Shelton pointed to him being a good, an ideal 3 technique, probably playing there. Really like the way he plays the run in those highlights. And if anyone was watching a few minutes ago on YouTube, also did some punting, it looked like. And I'm always going to be there for a big guy who's punting and doing a pretty good job of it. But no, I like the addition. Again, he's a guy that, when it's all said and done, maybe he's not among the highest rated guys for Georgia, but I see what Georgia's looking at there and the potential. And you get him in shape, you get him to the weight they want him at. I think that Cory Howard has a lot of potential at Georgia.
No doubt about it. All right, Jordan, 2 additions for you as well. Shadarius Toutel, flipped from Auburn. Kamari Brooks, right in Georgia's backyard. Where do you want? It's your team. I'll let you kind of dictate where we start.
Let's start with Sunday and just do it in order and go with Shadarius Toutel.
Yeah, absolutely. One of many times throughout this cycle that I added a wrinkle into our predict to commit game that played into your favor much more than it played into my favor. But Shadarius Toutel flipped from Auburn. This was, I think that we made this pick the week of after his official visit, I think after the scavenger hunt. And there was a lot of positive momentum with Georgia immediately after that visit. And so I think that it was a smart choice by you at the time. I think that it was one that got a little bit dicey there at a second. I mean, we're our good friend over at Auburn's 24/7 site, Christian Clemente. He'd spoken with Shadarius Toutel after his Auburn official visit, really with quotes ready to go about, hey, I'm shutting this thing down with Auburn. And, there was a reason why the Toodles wanted to have a week after that Auburn official visit before the dead period to really be able to figure things out. I think there were some important conversations that still needed to be had clearly with Georgia, but also with Auburn to be able to determine what way it was going to go. And, it's interesting. There have been some linebacker recruitments that Georgia has been involved with. I think back to Joseph Phillips a couple of recruiting cycles ago. We want to look way back to Owen Papo, different staffs. So maybe a poor parallel to draw, but there have been examples of Auburn getting some linebacker wins against Georgia. And I'll admit, a guy from Mobile that had been committed to Auburn as long as he had, that was saying all of the right things to our 24/7 sports sites about his commitment level to Auburn. I knew Georgia was confident. I didn't know how much I thought that Georgia was going to push for him. Ultimately, when it came down to it leading up to this dead period, Georgia was like, this is a guy that Georgia really, really wanted to add. I still think it remains to be seen whether Georgia signs 2 or tries to take 2 or 3 linebackers in this recruiting cycle. But I thought that the push to flip Shadarius Toutel as soon as possible was interesting in that it now allows you to really set your focus, to me, in 2 directions. Tyler Atkinson direction, which is probably you're just going to be taking one more linebacker, or the Nick Abrams, Tamarian Watkins, Isaiah Williams direction, maybe some other names that we're not quite as familiar with yet. And maybe you try and load up depth-wise at linebacker. But I think Georgia clearly did a great job with Shadarius Toutel. And I think that you're adding, a multi-sport athlete that's won in a lot of different sports. And you never doubt Glenn Schumann. He can win all of these recruitments, and his evals are as good as any position group in Athens.
Really impressed watching his film. I mean, just him standing there, he just looks super tall at linebacker, but instinctive, does a great job of closing. And yeah, I mean, there's a few positions and a few position coaches at Georgia that you just, whatever they do, sign off on it, feel good about it. Todd Hartley at tight ends, probably maybe the top one, but Glenn Schumann, if he's not, they're at least tied right there, because what they do at inside linebacker every year. Really like Shadarius Toutel's film. And yeah, the question of what they do at inside linebacker besides getting Toutel is significant. And yeah, we'll just have to see what happens, because Tyler Atkinson's that big name still out there. But no matter what, whatever happens with Atkinson, you should feel really good about Shadarius Toutel, like that pickup. And like you said, quite a pull from Georgia getting a kid from Mobile. It's just so hard to get anybody out of the state of Alabama, much less a guy that was committed to Auburn. That should be one that Georgia and its staff is really excited about.
Absolutely. And look, I've had a lot of conversations with folks on the Junkyard over Dogs 24/7 about why does it seem like Alabama can always go into Georgia and get guys, and Georgia never seems to be able to go into Alabama and get guys that they want. It's 2 different recruiting landscapes, but I think that just winning one recruitment like this, even though it was flipping him from Auburn, not flipping him from Alabama, but going into Mobile and getting a guy that Georgia wants, puts to bed some of those narratives, at least for the time being. I mean, we can get into the discussion around volume of prospects in Georgia versus volume of prospects in Alabama. We can get into there being 2 super competitive recruiting programs in Alabama versus there being 1 super competitive recruiting program in the state of Georgia. A lot of other factors that come into it as well. But nonetheless, Georgia going into Alabama, getting a guy that it wanted, flipping it from one of the home state schools, big time pickup for Georgia. I do think it means something for linebacker recruiting going forward too. I just don't exactly know what I think that means yet. The other addition, Cory Brooks, North Oconee High School, outside linebacker, 6'4", 220 pounds. And you could make the case to me that this was the most important addition for Georgia at any position in the 2026 recruiting class. I will hear out the case for several others. I'm willing to do that. Jared Curtis definitely has a case. Jay Lamar, honestly, in many respects, has a case. Some of the potential defensive line ads or offensive line ads that may or may not have happened yet, they could have a case. But the reason why I bring up Cory Brooks, Georgia only planned from the outset to take one outside linebacker. That plan could always change. You never know what's going to happen with numbers or how guys are going to perform this fall. It might change NFL draft decisions, and Georgia has to go find a guy late. That I'm not ruling that out. But during this, the meat of the recruiting cycle, Georgia was only going to take one outside linebacker. And they identified Cory Brooks right in their backyard as the guy that they wanted or needed to have at that spot. And more than any other position, I think that Georgia took a little bit of a risk in how they recruited other outside linebackers. I mean, you just look, they brought Dre Quinn, who committed to Clemson. They brought him in on an official visit. But they had official visits scheduled for guys like Xavier Griffin-Haynes, who I think would have loved to have committed to Georgia at one point in time. There were guys like Keldrick Golston, who has family ties to Georgia. Landon Barnes from Texas. That Georgia's trying to establish even more of a footprint in Texas, as they're trying to prove later this week as well. And those were guys that wanted to come on official visits to Georgia, and Georgia basically encouraged them to use their weekends in a different way. And that could have been risky. Cory Brooks easily could have committed to Alabama. Former Georgia linebacker Christian Robinson did an outstanding job in that recruitment to keep Alabama involved. But Georgia just didn't feel like that was a recruitment that it could afford to lose. And I think that you have to tip your cap to Chidera Uzo-Diribe, because it takes a bold recruiting method to look at other outside linebackers and say, hey, don't even come on your official visit. Like, we're only able to take one, and we think we know which one we're going to be going with. If you miss out on that, if he chooses Alabama on Monday, which obviously leading up to Monday, I think that Georgia's coaching staff felt pretty confident about where they stood in the Cory Brooks recruitment. But if he chooses Alabama on Monday, after the only other outside linebacker that's officially visited Georgia has already committed to Clemson, I don't really know what direction you turn to, and you're probably having to wind up going way, way down your recruiting board. I think that Cory Brooks really felt that prioritization from Georgia. I even saw some of his family members on social media put out some cool hype videos where they actually had a behind-the-scenes look where they're in the office in March with Chidera Uzo-Diribe, and Chidera Uzo-Diribe is basically saying, we're taking one, and we want it to be you. And that's, early stages of the spring practice window, and they reiterated that time and time and time again. And where Alabama was recruiting a couple of other guys to their Wolf position, Georgia really only had one jack that it wanted in the 2026 recruiting cycle, and it got it in Cory Brooks. I was talking to someone completely unrelated to the outside linebacker room, actually completely unrelated to the defense, I should say. I was like, who are the guys that I'm not – it was inspired by our Junkyard roundtable where who's the most untalked about guy on the football roster. I was like, who's the most untalked about guy in this 26 class? Cory Brooks' name came up as someone where we have him ranked as the number 19 edge in the 24/7 sports recruiting rankings. I think that he will see that rise. I think that Georgia views him in a much greater light than that. That's why they prioritized him the way that they did at that spot. But just a name to tuck away as someone that I will call my shot. He will be a team leader for Georgia in the future. He's wired that way. And I think skill set wise, you really can't ask for more from a guy that can set the edge in the run game. And also, I think has a ton of room for growth to develop his skill set and packages as a pass rusher. I think he's going to be great at it in the future. And I don't think he's even scratched the surface yet of how dynamic he's going to be able to be on that front.
I mean, to the point you were just making, Ben, of the four guys Georgia just added, I really like all four of them. I mean, I think Cory Brooks is the guy who impresses me the most. And I wanted to emphasize what you were just saying, that Georgia kind of put all of its eggs in the Cory Brooks basket. And it was pretty similar with Jay Lamar, although we know they're recruiting other running backs. Whereas the situation, if they don't get either of those guys, you're kind of going, okay, what's the backup plan? Because you put a lot of stock in getting this guy. Kamari Brooks, I was really impressed. If you're listening to this, go watch his highlights, and he's going to play on defense. But I was really impressed with him catching the ball. His balance is fantastic, which I know will translate to playing on defense too. Really liked his highlights, and I'm always going to be a sucker for the hometown kid, getting a guy from North Oconee. Now, you don't prioritize him because he's local, but I think when you get those local recruiting wins, they're always really special. I think Kamari Brooks was a guy that Georgia honed in on very early in this cycle, and it winds up paying off. And I really like his upside and what he can bring to Georgia once he gets here, either later in the year or in the spring.
Great championship caliber program over there at North Oconee as well. 2 cycles in a row, Georgia's taken someone from North Oconee. I will say Landon Roldan showed up after the commitment ceremony, but he was there to celebrate with his close friend Kamari Brooks on Monday afternoon as well. Those two are very close friends. I thought that I think it was closer than I probably gave it credit at times. Like, I think Christian Robinson did a spectacular job there. This one was going to be, for so many reasons, it was going to be so impossible for anybody else to get him away from Georgia. And credit to Chidera Uzodiribe, who, it's 2 cycles in a row. I feel like he's done as good of a job as you could have asked for him to do. I mean, he lands Isaiah Gibson in a difficult recruitment last cycle. He goes and gets Darren Akinnigbon early in the cycle as an evaluation that Georgia loved and wanted to pursue immediately, and then finds a late eval in someone that I think that they're really excited about in Chase Linton. And then you turn it around and go and get your number 1 target at outside linebacker. The 2027 class has 3 of the best players in the country at outside linebacker in the state of Georgia. I don't know if Chidera Uzodiribe will be around for that or not, but if they are, I think that it's safe to say Georgia's in good hands when it comes to recruiting that position right now.
Just want to say quickly, because I meant to bring this up with Jay Lamar. We talked about Kamari Brooks and that local guy. Jay Lamar, you got a running back wearing 34. I saw someone in the comments mention Herschel Walker. Look, you're always going to get a couple extra points if you're wearing Herschel's number in high school. So that only added to what is a really talented running back, and excited to see what he does once he gets here.
I have heard he might be switching to 1 for this season, though. So maybe trying to think, Sony Michel. He's going to channel his Sony Michel this season after a year as Herschel Walker.
Fair enough.
On the good news front, we have plenty to talk about and more to talk about here coming up as well. But we'll talk about a little bit of decommitment news. Not all news can be positive headlines. And on Monday, before Georgia really hit its slew of additions throughout the course of this week, Georgia did have a prospect flip from Georgia to Miami, and that was wide receiver Vance Spafford. If you've been listening here for a little while, if you've been reading over at Dogs 24/7 for a little while, I don't think that this one caught you off guard. Even so, even if it didn't catch you off guard, people were still, struggling to find ways to emotionally navigate losing a prospect to Miami. What I'll say is this. I think by the end of the week, Georgia will have 3 commitments at wide receiver. I think that Georgia, based on where its numbers are, I'm told that Georgia's typical allotment is around 11 at wide receiver. They have 12 right now. I think that based on what they're expecting to lose right now in the NFL draft, 3 makes more sense than 4 right now in terms of the total numbers that Georgia takes. So I think that by the end of this week, Georgia is going to feel incredible about where it sits from an in-state wide receiver recruiting standpoint. For now, I expect Georgia to ride with 3. There are a couple caveats to that. One, if Sedarian Morgan decides on July 2nd he wants to commit to Georgia instead of Alabama or one of the other programs recruiting him, Sedarian Morgan's a prospect you do not say no to. Georgia will figure that one out. Not all prospects get the same treatment necessarily. In the event that certain guys on Georgia's roster right now play their way into NFL draft status, which I am not ruling out when you look at Georgia's wide receiver room and just the ages of some of those guys and where they could stack up and their desire to maybe want to go test out the NFL draft waters. If it gets to that point, I could see Georgia circling back on certain guys in the fall. Now, the reality is those are going to be guys that are committed to other programs, because the way recruiting is nowadays, basically everybody is going to be committed by the end of this summer. So I don't even know who it is. I can throw out some names. Tyron Wortham, Bubba Frazier, Terrius Favors, probably some evaluated guys that I'm not mentioning enough yet that Georgia's going to be taking a look at in the fall. Aaron Gregory, just looking at in-state guys, Aaron Gregory, Devin Carter even, who took an official visit to Georgia. Like, these are all people that I think will be in consideration that Georgia will be taking a look at this fall. Whether they'll have success in being able to flip them if that time comes, I don't think that anybody can make that determination yet. But I think that that's something that you can look ahead to in October, in November. Is anyone taking visits? Is Georgia going out to some high school games that maybe you weren't expecting them to be at? And look, if your wide receivers play great this season, you're not going to be upset about it. It also might just change the numbers that you feel like you need to take in the 2026 cycle. So I wouldn't get too beat up over Vance Spafford ended up at Miami. Fast player. I watched him run a 4.35 on laser with my own eyes. I think that Georgia feels great about where its wide receiver position is, and I think that by the end of the week, they're going to be even more validated in that.
No, I think it makes sense, and I have a hard time keeping up with how long ago we talked about it, but we talked about would Vance Spafford flip, and I'm pretty sure that was my prediction. He was going to flip from Georgia, although I said Washington, so Miami winds up being there instead. And yeah, I had a big question just going into the 2026 cycle after Georgia signs 5 wide receivers. So it's not like they're hurting for young talent, and they're in good shape right now. And as you kind of teased, Ben, I think that there's something coming down the track here soon that folks may feel even better about what Georgia's got at the position.
Well, we will be talking about that and more upcoming decisions when we come back from break. We will have some talk about predict to commit, arrow pointing up, some other things happening around the country. Before we do that, please subscribe to Dogs 24/7. We have a great promo going, 50% off site-wide, running through the end of the month. Jordan, I know I always have to get you to check me on that, but I think it's by the end of the month. But just go ahead and do it. Do it now, because even the rest of this week, Thursday, Friday, there's going to be a lot going on going into early next week. Now is the best time to get on. So please subscribe to Dogs 24/7. We might have a brief hiatus after July 4th just because Georgia does a pretty good job of stacking its commitments ahead of July 4th, so Georgia coaches can enjoy it themselves. And then SEC Media Day comes quick on our heels, and then it's really all systems go for football season. So please subscribe. No better time than now. Join myself, Jordan Hill, Kip Adams. We've got Olivia Sayre will be back with us in the fall as well for all baseball coverage and football coverage too. We will hit a quick ad break, and when we come back, we're going to be talking about what you can expect the next few days in the Georgia recruiting world. All right, Jordan, we are talking important dates looking forward in the Georgia recruiting world, and that's pretty much every day at this point. It feels like, let's see, we're talking Wednesday afternoon. It's been since Sunday morning that we can say that Georgia wasn't, looking ahead to something that was about to be happening within the next 24 hours. Shadarius Toutel on Sunday, Kamari Brooks on Monday, Cory Howard on Tuesday, Lamar on Wednesday, and I don't think that is going to be stopping anytime soon. The next one coming up is tomorrow, Thursday, June 26th. 2 guys that will have Georgia hats on the table: wide receiver Craig Dandridge from Cambridge High School and offensive lineman Desmond Green from Timberland in South Carolina. Both were on your predict to commit team, and I think that both were ones that I would have felt pretty good about at the time that you were putting them on your predict to commit team as well. So one you will get, I believe, Craig Dandridge, I think you're in a pretty good spot for. We'll see what we hear over the next 24 hours to see if anything changes, but Georgia really prioritized this guy, and if Georgia is able to pull him in to add him with Ryan Mosley and with Brady Marchese, I will say it, this is my personal opinion. Not everybody is going to like this opinion. I believe that Craig Dandridge, Ryan Mosley, and Brady Marchese are the three best wide receivers in the state of Georgia in the 2026 recruiting class. I think that there's a big reason why those are the three guys from the state of Georgia that are going to be in Georgia's 2026 recruiting class, assuming Dandridge picks the Bulldogs on Thursday. Desmond Green, kind of want to wait and see what I hear more. He's been in and out of my mock classes. After his official visit on May 30th to June 1st, I thought that there was no way he ended up anywhere other than Georgia. And then some interesting things played out with Zyke Helton, with Zach Lewis. I think that Georgia is always going to show preference in the state of Georgia when it feels like it has to make some difficult decisions. I think you probably saw that a little bit with Vance Spafford and some of the options that Georgia chose to prioritize at wide receiver. I think that you maybe saw that a little bit on the interior offensive line, but I still don't have firm answers on what I think is going to happen with Brett Koleje. And if Georgia doesn't either, maybe Georgia makes a full-out push to try and steal Desmond Green away at the last second. We'll see what we hear out of that one. I imagine you're feeling pretty good on the Craig Dandridge front.
Yeah, I'm expecting one of two, and I think Craig Dandridge is the one that I wind up getting on this predict to commit. And man, I would encourage folks, if they did not see the highlights of him, and I believe that was a Corky Kell 7-on-7 last week. I mean, he just tore him up. Just had a fantastic day. I don't know how many touchdowns he wound up catching, but it's hard for me to argue with you, Ben, although that's one of my favorite things to do. When it comes to the wide receivers in the state of Georgia, if Georgia gets those three guys, I think Georgia should be elated, and that James Coley will have had a job well done if that's what they're able to do.
There were four, I'll say three or four guys on your predict to commit team that when you took them, I was like, man, for multiple reasons. Either one, I didn't think that, I didn't know if I thought that you had been as dialed in as you clearly were at points this cycle. So now I know better, and I thought maybe I could sneak a few under you. That proved to not be the case. Or it was guys that I just didn't think about early enough that I should have, like Carter Lucky. You landed him as early as you did, and thinking about it wisely, I don't know why he was one that was never on my list. But I would say Jordan Smith, Cory Brooks, and Craig Dandridge were the three that when you made those picks, I immediately thought, man, those were savvy selections. And I think that Craig Dandridge will prove to be that way tomorrow.
Don't let anyone tell you that I don't know ball.
No, and I thought maybe as the guy that's covering full-time recruiting, I thought I might be able to pull some fast ones on you. I think we've learned you're the one more likely to pull fast ones on me than I am to pull on you throughout the course of this exercise. Friday, June 27th. There are no days off in Georgia football recruiting. Friday, June 27th. Two big names out of state that I think that Georgia is in the thick of it for. That is defensive back Chase Calicut from North Shore in Houston, Texas. And then Malachi Lee. I don't even know what high school Malachi Lee goes to. I just know that he's from Hawaii. And I know that Jordan will be quick on that one for us. But, I brought Chase Calicut's name up for a while now. I would say we're probably going on a month now of me either bringing Chase Calicut's name up on Dogs 24/7 or even dating back to when I put him on my predict to commit team ahead of his official visit at the beginning of June. Georgia has been deep in this one. I know that there has been murmurs of Michigan and Texas, and I get it. And I think that Georgia was very much eyeing Texas the last visit that Chase Calicut took, but I think that Georgia is in a good spot there. I maybe would be on the more pessimistic side than most when it comes to Malachi Lee. I have always been the one sort of throwing the water on the Malachi Lee fire. I'm not trying to ruin the fun. I'm not saying that it's going to be impossible for Georgia to be able to get him. I've just heard more positive things as it relates to Malachi Lee and Michigan than I have with Georgia leading up to this decision on Friday. I will say we will be having not we as in Dog 24/7, but we as in 24/7 Sports will be hosting his commitment announcement on Friday. So you can watch that on 24/7 Sports. And, I would stay locked into Dogs 24/7 because I think we are going to be very looped in on how that thing is trending as it leads up to that Friday announcement.
And do I understand this right, Ben, that you're going to fly out there to host that you're going out to Honolulu to be able to host his commitment?
That's right. I tried to get the Stacey Searles budget where I could take 2 summer trips to Hawaii to connect with Malachi Lee, but I wasn't. My boss isn't as graceful as Kirby Smart is. I guess that's how I should put it.
I'll give my best attempt to say this high school. Are you ready?
Yeah, let's hear it.
Kamehameha?
I'm going to say that you didn't nail that one. So
I don't
normally,
feel great.
I'm supportive of your pronunciations, but I'm going to say that you botched that one a little bit.
It's in Honolulu, so I can say that much for sure.
All right, cool. So other dates to be keeping an eye on, and we will, depending on when we record next, we might be talking about these as news items or look ahead items. It just sort of depends, but a couple of dates to keep an eye on. June 30th, defensive lineman PJ Dean, Preston Carey. Those are hats on the table. I like where Georgia is for PJ Dean at this exact moment. I already brought up Sedarian Morgan. I don't think that Georgia is going to get Sedarian Morgan, but man, Georgia would love to have Sedarian Morgan if they could. I'm actually going to get to see Jared Curtis throw it to Sedarian Morgan down in Fort Lauderdale this week, so maybe I'll be able to pick up some tidbits here or there on where things are going. He's set to announce on July 2nd. A trio of commitment dates are scheduled for July 12th. Tyreek Green, safety out of Buford. Caden Prothrow, tight end out of Bowden, and then Derek Cooper, running back out of Chaminade Madonna Prep. All 3 scheduled for July 12th. When Georgia's getting guys, sometimes Georgia dictates dates, and they say, all right, no, we're actually going to do it on these dates so that we can have back-to-back-to-back things. If those dates change, that's probably something that's notable because that might be Georgia making that decision. If those dates stay the same, I am told that there is not some orchestrated July 12th. Georgia's trying to generate all sorts of buzz on that day. I'm told that is not that, even though there were some people speculating that. But I think that Georgia's in a really good spot for Tyreek Green, really good spot for Caden Prothrow, and we will continue to see on Derek Cooper. He's one, like Malachi Lee, I'm going to probably be more skeptical than others on. I know, I'll credit it because it's a lot of news that's, I guess, buzz that's going on as we're recording this. I know that on 3, Steve Wiltfong, Chad Simmons have put in a couple of RPM predictions for James Johnson to Georgia. That's another one that I also am going to remain a little bit skeptical on until I see I get a little bit more information on my end. But James Johnson, Valdon Sone, Tyler Atkinson, Brett Koleje, these are all guys that Georgia is kind of waiting and hoping set some commitment dates here in the next few weeks. And so, or few days, preferably. So if you start to see a June 28th commitment date pop up and a June 29th commitment date pop up and a July 1st commitment date pop up, I think you might start saying, I think Georgia might be onto something here because they are clearly trying to stack commitments as many days in a row as possible. All right, let's go arrow pointing up. Jordan, you want to go first or do you want me to go first?
I'll go first on this one. I have a couple of them. Arrow pointing up, the Braves beating the Mets. Atlanta, 32-41 this season against teams that are not the New York Mets. 5-0 against New York. Sending out a prayer to Frank from Barstool Sports. I don't know if he's going to survive this series, but man, the Braves keep taking it to the Mets, and as tough as this season has been to watch, it's at least a nice little consolation prize.
Beating the Mets is just awesome. It never will get old. To your point right there, Frank the Tank, anytime that I go to his meltdown videos as soon as possible every time because, look, his hashtag, Frank was right. Frank was right. I mean, every time that he brings up that the Mets are about to have a full-on crash out against the Braves, it happens. And as bad of a season as it has been for the Braves so far, I can only imagine how painful it's been for the Mets to have to sit through loss after loss after loss against the Braves over the last couple of weeks.
Death, taxes, and the Mets losing to the Braves. Nothing else to say there. Arrow pointing up, Chuck's Fish. Had a chance to go have dinner earlier this week there. Love me some sushi. Great time. Always love trying to eat local, and you can't go wrong with Chuck's.
Yeah, Chuck's is – what all did you get? Do you remember?
I don't remember. We had 3 different ones, and I just know every time we go with the sushi rolls, it comes through. I don't think I've ever had one where I was like, no, I enjoyed what we wound up getting.
Yeah, I love Chuck's Fish. Great spot. Always love the local food call out. I mean, honestly, even not on their sushi menu, just some of their main entrees and appetizers, like across the board, you can never go wrong at Chuck's Fish.
I will say this: like every time my wife and I go, we're like, let's try something else. Let's not get the sushi, and we just get the sushi. It's so good.
All right, arrow pointing up. Backyard baseball. I don't know how many people listening to this were in the age range where backyard baseball was a big deal. I found out recently that it was now available on the Nintendo Switch. My wife has a Nintendo Switch, downloaded immediately. I'm honestly borderline addicted to it. I can't even go. I got to play a game in my league play before I go to sleep every night. That's how addicted I am to it at this point. I've got Pablo Sanchez, Keisha Phillips. I got Angela Del Vecchio on the mound. I mean, we've got a squad. So shout out to anybody that has played backyard baseball, but also I think if you got PS5 or if you've got the Nintendo Switch 1 or Nintendo Switch 2, you can play backyard baseball right now. And I strongly encourage it.
I was going to shout out Pablo, but since you did that, Pete Wheeler, Pete Wheeler was always a goat too.
Oh yeah, I've got Pete Wheeler leading off for me on my roster this year. We just bunt it. He beats it out to first every time. He leads the league in steals. I mean, he's a weapon on the base path as well. Yeah, Dogs in DC in the YouTube chat says wheelchair guy. Maybe could have come up with a more creative way of describing him. But Kenny Kawaguchi, I knew what you meant. He's on the squad as well. So shout out Backyard Baseball. I will also shout out, and for our viewers on YouTube, you know what I'm talking about. But it is, I found this out the hard way. The game is created by Humongous Entertainment. Anybody in our YouTube chat knows Humongous, Wayne Mungus. It looks like we have a new member of the Mungus family potentially this week as well. So, my team is the Wolk's Humongous All-Stars. And I was thinking about Hugh while I was playing the game. So shout out to our YouTube commenters, as faithful as you all are. I will also go arrow pointing up on tampering accusations across college football. I don't know if you've seen this, Jordan. Obviously, people I think have known about the Xavier Lucas, Wisconsin, Miami kerfuffle that's been going on this offseason. I think that it has culminated in some kind of lawsuit of sorts. I haven't really gotten into the legalese of it all, so I don't really know what the status of it is, but it appears people are becoming more emboldened in, at least alluding to tampering accusations, because I don't know if you've seen this one. Georgia's getting caught up in a recent one as well on the Triple Option podcast, which I think is Urban Meyer, Mark Ingram, and I'm not sure who else. Brett Bielema was on there as a guest, and he was talking about Josh McCray. And his exact quote was, "We did lose a guy to Georgia. Somehow he found his way to the portal, and 12 hours after being in the portal, he was on a flight to Georgia. I don't know how that happened, but it's crazy. Wish Josh all the best. He took advantage of that opportunity." Jordan, what are your thoughts?
I think just very savvy recruiting from the Bulldogs. So they saw a name they liked, and man, they bought him that ticket, and he was in town before you knew it.
I had two thoughts on it. One, if the timeline is laid out as I understand it, from Brett Bielema, Josh McCray enters the portal. 12 hours after entering the portal, he's on a flight to Georgia. Seems like a perfectly normal amount of time to be able to schedule travel when one of the top football programs in America sees you as one of the top running backs in the portal. I'll leave that at that. My other thought was, if we got salty Brett Bielema going on national podcasts talking about Josh McCray and the way that his transfer portal recruitment went, I mean, I had him on my roster draft. I had him as last week on the Junkyard roundtable as the most untalked about guy in Georgia. Well, I guess Brett Bielema is seeing to that a little bit. He's talking about him a little bit more. But also, again, if there's salty Brett Bielema talking about Josh McCray, I think Georgia fans should be excited. You're not being salty Brett Bielema about some player that you're not disappointed about losing from your roster.
No, I think it's great. And, Brett's always been one to share his thoughts and feelings. And remember that Pop-Tart Bowl, him and Shane Beamer got into it in the middle of the game. So anytime Brett's talking, there's usually something to it.
All right. I believe that's all I've got for arrow pointing up. I did want to go a few through around the country. If there's any that you remember that you feel like I'm missing, feel free to call them out as well. I'm going to start with quarterback Bo Bentley, a guy that Georgia was involved with that had Georgia not gotten Jared Curtis, Bo Bentley would have probably been the quarterback that Georgia pursued, and I think Georgia would have found a way to land Bo Bentley. Didn't have to happen. His first love was Oklahoma. LSU was certainly in the mix for a while, but I think when it came down to it, after official visit season, the way that he had been prioritized by Oklahoma from start to finish, won out. A couple of guys from both of our predict to commit teams where we got some negative news this week. Alabama offensive lineman Chris Booker, our offensive line commit Chris Booker, he shut down his recruitment. I think that Alabama did a great job there after Georgia and Georgia Tech and many others really realized how good of a player Chris Booker was this spring. I think Alabama kind of already knew what they had. Tyron Wortham does flip from UCF, but not to Georgia, to Michigan State. You know, you heard what I said earlier when we were talking about Georgia and 3 wide receivers. 100% a name that I am still keeping an eye on this fall as a possibility. I think that if Georgia gets to the point where they can take 4, or things get interesting again with Brady Marchese or however it might play out, like Tyron Wortham is a name that I am not losing touch with. Let's put it that way. And then Vodney Cleveland, defensive lineman from Alabama that you had on your predict to commit team. Got interesting there with Florida and Texas late, but he commits to Texas. Texas doing a great job when it comes to defensive line recruiting. A couple of guys that ended up at Florida State. Jaden O'Neal, quarterback, took a visit to Georgia at one point this year. Xavier Tiller, an in-state tight end who Georgia really never pursued hard, but someone that I think would have liked to have been recruited more by Georgia had he been given the opportunity. Xavier Tiller. And then Devin Carter took an official visit to Georgia. Yet another name that I would put in that Tyron Wortham camp of we have to keep watching it. We can't stop watching wide receivers that Georgia brought in on official visits now that they're at other places, because if Georgia gets an extra spot, they're going to make a push for some guys. Devin Carter flips from Auburn to Florida State. Not really a surprise either. When we had Ryan Mosley on a couple of weeks ago, it might have been actually after we got finished recording, but he basically said right after that, he's like, yeah, I think he's going to flip, but I think it's going to be to Florida State, not to Auburn. Titan Davis, a defensive lineman that Georgia wasn't in the Final Four for. I bring Titan Davis up because I was told by someone that I trust that scouts these things that they believe that Titan Davis is the best, 5-tech defensive end type in this cycle, and not enough people are really talking about that. He's a guy that very easily could have ended up at Alabama. I think people should be happy that he ended up at Michigan, not at Alabama, because I think Titan Davis is a really great player that not enough people are talking about. And then some quarterback dominoes. Oregon's been trying to figure their situation out. Ryder Lyons, 5-star quarterback, commits to BYU. They end up having to figure something out. I don't know about you, Jordan. This feels sacrilegious to me. Bryson Beaver commits to Oregon. Can you have the name Bryson Beaver as a quarterback recruit and commit to Oregon over Oregon State? I mean, I know where they're at in the world these days, but Bryson Beaver, he can't be at Oregon.
It's borderline sacrilegious, and I kind of want to call it on the Oregon State staff. What are you guys doing? This might as well have been a firstborn, and you can't get him, man.
Yeah, well, they definitely got screwed in this new world of college football. There's no question about that. That Oregon State got the short end of the stick, but Oregon, they were in the Jared Curtis sweepstakes that had them involved with all sorts of different quarterbacks because they didn't get Jared Curtis, and I think that Dan Lanning finally finds his guy in Bryson Beaver. All right. A lot has happened when it comes to predict to commit, Jordan. We have already talked a lot about guys that you've added, guys that I've added, and you brought up a great idea last week, I thought, to start using the class calculator to take a deeper look at who it is that we have on our team. And, I've been bragging a little bit over the last couple of weeks because I've had more guys in volume than you. But I want to call out who you already have in the class. Quarterback Jared Curtis, defensive back Jordan Smith, edge rusher Kamari Brooks, linebacker Shadarius Toutel, and defensive lineman Carter Lucky. That's 5 commits. That's a composite team score of 119.60. We'll get into what you have coming up here in a second, but how are you feeling about the team that you have right now?
Feeling pretty good. I think especially when you know that you got a few other coals in the fire, and like we mentioned, may not even be done this week. So it's one of those, again, you'll probably wind up beating me when it's all said and done, but I'm pretty pleased. When we decided to start doing this segment, I was like, man, I'm gonna get dominated doing this every single week. Ben's gonna be all over it, but I fared okay, and I like what we've done to this point.
I mean, there have been a couple of opportunities that I've taken to kind of flex my info muscles, I guess, in certain opportune spots, which was unfair probably, but nature of the game. But the guy, I mean, look, you got the quarterback in the class. I think that holds more weight than one commit or any team score total would be able to do. I mean, I think that you got arguably, like I said earlier in the show, maybe the most important guy on the defensive side, arguably the two most important guys on the defensive side, because I don't think we're talking enough about Jordan Smith or Cory Brooks. So two really, really good pickups by you. And I feel like you had to get the Jordan, right? Like you got the Jordan on your team. And so that was just, that alone was a big pickup for you. On my team, I have 8 guys committed in the class. And those 8 players are, if I get it pulled up here for those watching on YouTube, Justice Fitzpatrick, offensive lineman Ekeneg Boko, running back Jay Lamar, defensive back Zach Fort, wide receiver Ryan Mosley, outside or not outside linebacker, interior offensive lineman Graham Houston, interior offensive lineman Zyke Helton, and defensive lineman Cory Howard. That's 8 commits with a total of 165.58. So I have a little bit of comfort zone to work with here, but you're going to be getting one of my favorite players in the entire recruiting cycle on Thursday if my information holds true. So I think that you're in a good spot there. I think that I probably have one that we're adding here at the end of the week too. I think that you'll have one early next week. So I think it still remains to be seen. I like where I'm at in both volume and in team total, but I think, if my mock class stands true, I think it would be maybe 10-8 or 11 or 10-9 or 11-9. And then I did not have James Johnson in my mock class. And I think that there's still a chance that James Johnson could tip that over this. So I think it could still get interesting here, Jordan.
Yeah, I feel pretty good just from a competitive standpoint. And yeah, there's no rooting situations. We don't root for teams or we don't root for guys. I'm going to go ahead and say it. I am rooting for James Johnson to land at Georgia just because that would be the big fish that would really help me in this competition. If Georgia winds up getting James Johnson, that's good news for Jordan's team and the predicted commit.
Just going through our teams in general, just as a refresher for everybody at home, I've mentioned obviously the 5 that you already landed: Curtis, Lucky, Smith, Brooks, and Toutel. Mark Bowman, Jared Smith, Vodney Cleveland, and Tico Crittenden are the only ones that are, I would consider, losers at this point in time. But again, you never know. These things could potentially change. I'm feeling good about where you're at with Tyler Atkinson, PJ Dean, Craig Dandridge, Caden Prothrow. So you've got a few there. And then, like you said, if James Johnson goes your way, if Derek Cooper goes your way, it could start getting real interesting for me. And Malachi Lee, for that matter, it could start getting real interesting really quick. On my team, I've my misses so far: Jackson Cantwell, Peyton Dyer. Heard he might be playing his high school football out in California as well for his senior year. Interesting in that he committed to Southern Cal. Whitley Cadeau, defensive line. Tyron Wortham, I'm putting in the loser category because he did actually end up flipping, but we'll see. I still think that one could get interesting. Don't feel great about where I'm at with Malcolm Gaston or Ernest Rankins, but Chase Calicut, I feel like Georgia's in a really good spot for. Tyreek Green, I feel like Georgia's in a really, really good spot for. Valdon Sone, Brett Colajay are 2 that I had in my mock class, and I think that things could trend well for Georgia here coming up as well. So there's a lot still to happen. We're not going to make a new predicted commit this week, but I'm not ruling out the possibility that I just spring one on us randomly at some point later on in the recruiting cycle to serve my own benefit. Jordan, do you got anything else? Anything that you feel like we didn't cover? I know we covered a lot.
I think we did a good job. I did want to shout out before we ended this episode. We're recording this ahead of the NBA draft. Asa Newell. Ben,
Yeah.
you got any predictions? I will say, which this is easy because I think they have like 5 picks. I'm gonna predict Asa Newell winds up with the Brooklyn Nets. Do you have any feelings, any predictions for Asa Newell?
Where is he falling in mocks right now? What pick range?
I mean this not to not be able to help you. He's been all over the place. Kevin O'Connor from Yahoo said he could go 9th overall, that he's like trending up toward the lottery. Most of what I've seen, I would feel comfortable saying like 18 to 23 is where I expect just on what I've been reading.
Well, right before we hopped on, I had read something, and you never know what's real and what's bogus in this time of year or this time of day on a draft night. But I was reading something about the Hawks considering they've already made some moves to acquire Kristaps Porzingis, who has some health concerns as that big stretch big. Maybe, I heard the Hawks, they've got the 13th pick. They obviously traded away 22 in that one. They've got the 13th pick. I heard they might try and trade down to the Nets for 19 and adding Cam Johnson. So they'd get a shooter. They'd get the number 19 pick. If Asa Newell is available 18 to 23 at 19, I feel like he kind of fits what the Hawks would like to do with a stretch big. So maybe I'm just optimistic thinking, but why not Atlanta?
Can't think of any time that the Hawks drafted a Georgia guy with their first pick and it worked out. Nothing's really coming to mind.
Yeah, no, nothing comes to mind for me either. All right, Jordan. Great. Well, that should have been in one of our arrow pointing up. So it's almost, I feel like somehow the NBA draft is going ignored right now. It's like, this is a big day. I'm usually dialed in on it, and I'm really not dialed in on it, but that's what the summer recruiting calendar has done to me. So, all right. As a reminder, as I said earlier in the show, please subscribe to Dogs 24/7. We have a 50% off promo going through the end of the month. I would encourage you to hop right off of listening to this show and go lock in that subscription, because there's plenty that's going to be coming up this week. I'm going to be down in Miami or Fort Lauderdale at St. Thomas Aquinas for the OT7 finals. Jared Curtis is going to be down there. A lot of Georgia targets. Chase Calica is going to be announcing his commitment on Friday night down there. I've already connected with a couple of Georgia commits that I think might just be going down there to hang out as well. So I think there will be some good, unique content opportunities over at Dogs 24/7. I will also be making a day trip over to IMG Academy in Bradenton for Future 50. There's always, Jared Curtis was the quarterback at Future 50 last year. Ryan Montgomery was the quarterback at Future 50 2 years ago. There is always Georgia influence at the Future 50. I think it's a great opportunity for you all as Georgia fans to get ahead on the 2027 recruiting class, which, with the way the calendar works nowadays, we're going to be paying attention to the 2027 recruiting class sooner than ever before, starting in July. So please subscribe. If you're watching on YouTube, please like and subscribe to the YouTube channel. We greatly appreciate you there. For our biggest audiences over at Apple Podcast and Spotify, give us a 5-star review. You can leave anything you want in the comments section about how terrible that you think Jordan is. Just give us a 5-star review. That's what matters most to us. So another great episode. Jordan, thank you again. As always, I think we will have an episode next week, but I'm also not going to promise an episode next week just in case we need to get our way out of it, because I know that Jordan is going to be earning some much deserved downtime over the next week as well. So we'll see. It might be me and Kip, might take a week off. News will probably dictate what decision we make on that. But I appreciate everyone for listening. For Jordan Hill, I am Benjamin Wolk. This was another episode of the Junkyard Dawgcast, Stay Wolk UGA Recruiting Show edition, and we will see you all next time.